Hello and welcome. I am Sunny, and joining me today is Sarita Holtzman, Sonlight's president and founder. And we are going to be talking all about an issue today that typically impacts most homeschoolers at one time or another. And so we're going to be trying to offer you encouragement and maybe some practical suggestions as well if you're experiencing this. We're going to be talking all about overwhelm and what you do when life gets hard. How do you stay motivated to keep going? Parenting can be challenging enough, but when you add in homeschooling, that's a whole other layer of responsibility. And sometimes it feels like a lot. So Sarita and I are going to be sharing our own experiences and some advice and encouragement from our Sonlight community to hopefully help you get through this hard situation. Sarita, let's talk about that idea of overwhelm, though. I think it's very normal for everyone to get overwhelmed with something at one point or another. But what do you do if you feel like you aren't prioritizing homeschooling like you want to or need to for the sake of your children?
I think to back up a little bit, but to say how do we help with this situation? Is I think we want to always be asking for help. I think oftentimes we're raised in a culture that says be independent. You don't need anybody else. But we're actually hardwired for community. So if you can find homeschooling friends that you can connect with, or take a walk with, or just get encouragement from, or parents or grandparents, or your spouse, get your husband involved. My husband used to read every evening. It's one of those where it's a way for him to feel like he's connected and involved. It's absolutely a useful thing to do. I think it's something that's hard for a lot of us to do because we think, oh, it's almost shameful to do that. But I don't think we should be lone rangers. I think we should be people that say we have needs and we can all share with one another, right? So that's one idea. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love that idea. I've always incorporated my husband into our homeschooling as well. But I know, like what you said, sometimes we feel like, oh, we're taking on homeschooling. We have to be independent. We have to do all of it on our own. And we forget sometimes to ask for help. I know for me, I'm very much that driven type A personality. And I'm married to a wonderfully laid back man who, balances me out, who doesn't always realize that I need the help unless I say, hey, can you help me with this? So just a reminder, if you are that person who has it all on the ball and always keeps things going, the people in your life may not realize that you're struggling if you don't tell them that. And there's no shame in asking for that help when you need it. But I know when I say, hey, can you do a science experiment with this child? I don't want to make a mess right now. Or can you read this story to him or listen to this student read to you or whatever it is? He's always more than willing to jump in and help. It's just a matter of sometimes not realizing where I might need that help. Same thing, if it's, you mentioned the homeschool community and finding your homeschool friends. If there's somebody maybe you can kind of swap with, maybe your homeschool friend is really good at certain subjects, really enjoys them. Maybe your kids can go over there for an art class or a science experiment or something like that. And then you can take their kids and kind of swap those teaching and childcare responsibilities like a co-op. That is something where you can rely on somebody else's strengths, and it's going to give you a little more free time to do whatever you're dealing with. I know I love outsourcing anything creative or artsy because that is just not my natural gifting. I don't don't like making messes. I could teach, reading and history and those subjects all day long. But if it's something creative, I know that my kids would be better suited learning that from someone else. So whatever those areas are, if you feel overwhelmed or like you're doing too much, I love what you said about there is no shame in asking for help and outsourcing some of those things. And there are times in your life when you might need to take an actual break. If you're caretaking for someone, if you just had a baby, if there's illness hitting your home, Sarita, I know we're literature based at Sonlight, and so you can still move forward in those times. But what would you suggest for someone who maybe needs to pump the brakes a little bit on doing their full usual homeschool routine, ways to still keep learning happening and keep that environment where, the children are going to learn, but in an area where you are able to pause and take those breaks if needed?
I think we have to recognize that it's only 180 days, or if you're doing the 4-day program, it's only 144. Well, out of a school year, a whole year is 365. So just plan for times when you know you're going to be overwhelmed. I know we have a lot of customers that take December off, right? Because it's just such a full month, but then they pick it up in May or June, or do a little extra during the summer when kids need a chance to just sit down under the shade tree for a while and do something other, right? So those would be ways of getting around it. I think too, we often don't recognize that we can hire out different things, right? I can remember I was talking with a friend at church one day and said, "Oh man, I'm just so overwhelmed. I don't know how to get it all done." And she looked at me and she said, "Sarita, tell me you're not still cleaning your house." And I thought, of course I am. That's what women do, right? She said, "There are women that need that job, Sarita. Find one and get her to clean your house." I thought, it's super helpful, right? So if we need to pick up people who can do either things around the house, or I know of a lot of homeschoolers these days that hire areas where they don't feel as strong, right? Where you find someone who can tutor in math or take over the language arts piece of it. Things that we maybe don't necessarily feel like our strengths, but there's ways to find people who can come and help. My only point here is you don't have to do it all on your own, right? There's resources and there's tools, and find them and get the help that you need. I mean, I just feel like for a little bit of money, I could have my house cleaned every week. Thank you, Jesus.
And sometimes it's worth it, right? Like I know sometimes we're like, oh, I don't want to spend the money on that, or I want to do this, but your time is also valuable. Your sanity is also valuable. And I love that. Yeah. If there's something that is one more thing that you don't have to do and you really want to focus on homeschooling, I think that's a great suggestion.
I had one more.
Yeah.
I had
Oh
one more
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, that's all right. I just think we also could relax our standards. You know, it used to be said, you know, "Oh, my floor is so clean, I could eat off of it." But I thought, do we even want to eat off the floor? Why don't we use plates, right? So it's one of those where let's just say, okay, I'm not going to mop. I'm not going to sweep every day. I'll sweep every third day, or I'll get my kids involved. There's just ways we can work around the things that just make us feel too busy, and figure out ways to just strategize and think about ways to help yourselves just get along a little easier.
Yes, that is great advice. Something somebody once told me about those standards too is so many of our standards, we're placing them on ourselves, but they're really imaginary standards, right? God doesn't care if our floor is cleaned every single day or if it's every 3 days, right? Are we discipling our children? Are we feeding into our marriage? These are the things that are important, but for whatever reason, we oftentimes want to put that high standard on every single thing we do, and it's not necessary. And so yeah, that is a great reminder. Also too, I hear from a lot of homeschool families who they are involved in a lot of things. They love the flexibility that comes from homeschooling, but sometimes they're involved in too many things. So how do you know if maybe you need to say no to some other things so that you can focus on that homeschooling, which is a big job?
I think it's always coming back and evaluating, right? Being really strategic in the things that we do, right? Where we say, yes, I do want to serve and I'm hardwired to serve, but burnout is bad, right? So to be looking at your schedule and saying, this is too much. And for a season, because remember, homeschooling's a really limited period of time. At most, it's about 10 years, right? So for 10 years to say, okay, I'm not going to do all these other things because I'm going to focus on my kids. I think it's just being realistic and recognizing we do want to invest in our kids because they're the priority at this time, right? So I think it's just being really strategic in how we even view the things that happen in our lives.
I love that. That's so good. So Sarita, what would you tell somebody maybe who's lacking the motivation to keep going? They're struggling. There's not like one major thing necessarily that's preventing them from homeschooling, but they're struggling with just the day-to-day or staying motivated. How would you encourage them to keep going or why it might be important for them?
I think we always want to remember why we're doing what we're doing. I would say that we know that it's good for kids when we homeschool our kids. It's a way, we know that if a child is struggling in school, the recommendation is that you get a tutor. Homeschooling is basically a tutoring situation. It's a one-on-one. So we have a chance to speak directly into our kids in ways that's very effective, very practical, really, really, really works. I think too, it's a good way to show our kids that we can do things differently than how the herd does them, right? It's one of those where we can say, we believe in doing things that are right and good, even if they're not what everybody else is doing, right? And it's a way of modeling that. And I think, wow, that is a really great life skill for our kids to learn from a young age, that we don't have to walk in lockstep like everybody else. I think too, it's a way to show our kids every single day that we just love them. It's a way that we pour into them and show them that we're very practically serving them in this very, very important way. And I think we can teach according to their strengths, right? If they're really good at math, we can focus on upper level math that they maybe wouldn't get to in school. That has to actually train kids in a particular pattern. Works the other way too. You have a child that's a little slower in an area, you can work with them a little longer, and there's no penalty in all of that. So for kids, it is good for kids to be home. I think it's a calmer atmosphere. It's a way for kids to ruminate and think and to dream and do things that they don't have time for when they're in school. It's great for kids, but I'd also say it's good for moms. It's for us to relearn and to kind of rethink things that maybe we didn't pick up the first time. It's a chance for us to model for our kids that learning is a good thing, right? It's something where if we send them off to school, we're actually modeling to them that somebody else is teaching them and it's not that important to us. But here we get a chance to say, no, 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 we want to learn. And if your husband comes home and says, now, why aren't the dishes done? You can say, well, we were reading because it's required for school. It's a chance for us to sit and get to enjoy even the things that we get to do because we're assigned to. It's perfect. I think it's great.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so great.
I think good too. It's good for our world. I think ultimately we're raising up kids that have different values than the world system is trying to put into them. We can give them the skills that we think match who they are. We have time because we're with them. We can actually get kids ready to go out and make a difference in the world where they've been. I think we could empower them to just be ready. It's a great thing, and we want to make sure that we're always keeping that in mind, that it's good for our kids. It's actually good for us, though sometimes it doesn't feel like it. But ultimately, we're doing a good thing for the world because we're raising up world changers. It's awesome.
Oh, I love that. That's so good. Yeah. And so helpful if you're kind of struggling through, why am I doing this? Or you're focused on the hard things, to see all of the positives that you mentioned there, whether it be for your child or the world or for you. I love what you said about relearning things as an adult. The longer I homeschool, I question, did I learn anything when I was in school? Because I feel like I'm learning constantly. And I love doing that with my kids too. Like you said, demonstrating to them that learning is good and learning is fun, and you can do it together as a family. And something else that I would encourage is to just take it kind of one day, 1 year at a time, those baby steps. If you're homeschooling a preschooler, you don't need to worry about them graduating high school at this point.
Yeah.
You are just starting out. And I know sometimes that was where my focus was early on, is like, oh, well, how long am I going to do this? Is it 20 years of my life that I'm going to be investing in homeschooling? And that feels like a lot when you're starting out. But if you say, I'm going to do it this year, I will reevaluate, make decisions next year. Right now, all that matters is this year or this week. I always tell people in the instructor's guide, we break it down by week. So just focus on this week. What books are you reading? What are you learning together? And that makes it manageable. You're not trying to eat the whole elephant at once. You're taking it one bite at a time. You're taking it one day at a time. Something else too that I find, if we're struggling, to stay motivated, is establishing like easier systems or ways to keep our homeschool materials ready to go. Makes it a lot easier. So something that I do, I always keep our Sonlight tote bag with our books. So that way, if we're about to head out the door and I'm wondering, oh, we're not going to get school done today because we have all these appointments or places we need to go, I can grab read alouds, I could grab history books, science books, basically anything that's not super hands-on. But even that, you can throw a clipboard or a notebook in your bag and take school with you. And so I have found that when we do that, we're able to squeeze in school between things. And it's always more fun to change up your scenery and go somewhere else. And so we have done school in the car, in drive-through lines, at coffee shops, at the library, doctor's offices, like all over the place. And it's something that has made it easier to fit schooling into our lives. And like you said, learning, it's a lifelong process. It should happen anywhere, any day, anyway. And so we are able to model that. So yeah, find ways that it's going to be easier, have your books out on a shelf in the living room so that you walk by them every day, or put your giant binder into smaller folders if the big binder is a lot to carry around, whatever it might be. We have a ton of ideas and suggestions in the Sonlight Connections community. So we do encourage you to join us there in the app or on Facebook, where you'll get ideas from other people. And you can always ask those questions as well. I'm struggling with this. You'll get about 20 other parents that will jump in and say, oh, this is what I did. So Sarita mentioned the community piece early on. Find your community. We're out there, even if you don't have a local community. The Sonlight community is quite large and international. So we would love to help you out if you're struggling with those things. Now let's jump into kind of that endurance or stamina piece. I mentioned, depending on how many kids you have and their age gaps, you might be looking at a 20, 25-year journey, all said and done, if you homeschool all of them. So what do you do when it's feeling really hard? You feel like you're running out of steam, or maybe it's not what you imagined it to be. I think we all have kind of our notions of what homeschooling should look like, but what if it doesn't feel like that in your home?
I totally agree with what you said about community, because I think we sometimes think we're unique and we're novel, but there's nothing new under the sun, right? So some other Sonlight mom has been where you've been and will have ideas and tips of what to do. You can also let us know. We pray for our customers every week, and we are more than glad. And we have a God we believe answers those prayers. So just send us your requests, and we'll be glad to pray over those, and we do. I think, too, I would try something different. I know when I taught my children, we used Saxon way back in the day, and my kids thought it was quite dull. So I tried, let's do every other problem. And then after that, I thought, no, we're just going to get a different math program, because this really is dull. So sometimes it's even just mixing up what you're doing and trying something else. And I think ultimately I would say, you want to exhibit grit. There's books that talk about that we just don't stick to it anymore, right? And I just think as moms, we have a way to model stick-to-itiveness, that grit, that willingness to say, I'm going through a rough patch, but I'm going to overcome. Super, super good for your children to see and to actually go, my mom did that and I can do that too, right? So I think I'd kind of keep some of those things in mind and say, no, I can do this. I can endure. It's a rough patch now, but brighter days are coming. Our kids do. I can remember when I started homeschooling, my son had gone a year to school and came home and would look at me like, do you have the right to even tell me? So sometimes it's even just figuring out how your patterns and your models and all those systems work. And that ultimately sometimes helps as well. That's
Yeah, absolutely agree. And remember, you can do all things through Christ who gives you strength. That's something that you sometimes have to hold on to. There are hard days just in life, and sometimes you're at a low patch, but God's there with you. Let's talk about kind of how to keep from losing yourself, spiritually, practically. I know when people get busy, oftentimes their time with the Lord suffers because they're like, oh, I've got all these other things to do. But I know keeping that foundation, that Bible study for me has helped me a ton with all sorts of things, not just homeschooling, but it's a way of getting my head on straight. And that way I'm ready to approach my day in a different way than I would be without knowing God's there helping me through it. So what would you say to somebody who is maybe struggling, floundering, and they're not quite sure how to get back on track and how to prioritize that piece of it, staying focused spiritually and practically?
I think for me, when I was homeschooling the kids, I actually used our Bible reading time as kind of my personal devotion time. We did all the books together and we learned together, and it was a way to, again, model. I think that's probably the key element of homeschooling that's so powerful that we don't necessarily even think about, right? As we do different things, our kids are watching, right? So as we read the Bible together and talk things through, for me, that was even a way of saying, oh, I can fit this in pretty easily. It's scheduled in the IG, right? So for me, that worked. Good for you to be on top of it even in the mornings ahead of time, but that was how I got around it. I think nowadays we can easily listen to podcasts when we're doing the dishes or mopping the floors or doing the kind of mindless tasks that have to get done. That's a way to also keep yourself encouraged. And I would actually recommend that we not neglect the gathering of together, right? So just don't skip church. I just think it's important if we're trying to keep with community for our kids' sake as well as for us. So those would be some of the tips that I had.
Yeah, I love that. And I think oftentimes homeschoolers are looking for, where do I socialize my kids? Youth group has
Mhm.
always been great for my teenager. But yeah, church involvement and all of that that's a built-in community of like-minded people, and you're going to learn and get that encouragement. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think making time for that, getting your kids plugged in is super helpful. At the end of the day, what encouragement can we offer, or do we think it's worth it? Is there any
Mhm.
regret at all to, going through the journey, maybe some of the challenges that are involved, and then coming out on the other side? Have grown children. Mine, I'm still homeschooling, but is it worth it? Is it a worthwhile investment and time in your kids? And do you have any regrets or any additional
Oh,
encouragement to offer?
I have zero regrets. I never planned to homeschool, and I'm super grateful on this side of things that God allowed me to do that. That is where I live and breathe, and that's my desire for all moms, that they would have that testimony as well. I think sometimes it's kind of hard to see in the moment, but homeschooled kids are different in a wonderful way, right? They aren't like the kids that just live and breathe for what they're wearing to school, or that there's something almost magical is the wrong word because it has a wrong connotation, but there's something amazing that happens when we spend time with our kids, homeschooling them in ways that just make a difference in their lives. I think there's so many great things that come out of homeschooling, but just a couple that came to mind. We want to keep these truths in mind, that homeschooling knits families together. I have 4 children, and they have the 4 different learning styles. They are as different as night and day, but because they were forced to spend time together as family, as homeschooling family, they love each other in ways that would never have happened in the ordinary world. That is a gift to our family that happened, that I didn't even plan for or intend to have happen, but it's a gift that happens when we press in. You have an opportunity as a mom to see the lights come on. When you first teach your kids to read, I mean, what a blast that is, right? When you get to say, yeah, wow, I helped you get to that point. And it's not just with reading, but it's in lots of ways where your kids make connections. You go, now that is a good connection. And we don't get to see those if they're gone from the home all the time. You all learn to talk with one another, which I don't think that happens in the regular world. When kids come home from a school all day, they're tired. And if you ask them and want to draw them out, they say, it was fine. And they move on because they're talked out. When they're home, we have a chance to grow and learn to love and appreciate our children and their strengths in ways we don't have a chance to see if they're gone all day long. It's a huge gift. It's a huge gift for us to do. So we learn to talk with one another. We get to listen to those who, if you have a chance to listen to moms who've gone before you, like me, I think to a person, they will say, it was so worth it. And I want to close with this one, in that the resistance is real. Okay, and what I mean by that is there's a lot of things where there's no resistance because it's not important, right? If you wanted to watch TV, you could go turn it on. There'd be nothing that would stop you from that, right? You could sit down and just veg for a while. But the things that are truly important, the enemy comes against them, right? The enemy comes against marriage because it's the foundation of society. That's why our marriages struggle. It's hard for me, right? Raising our children is important because our children are eternal souls, right? They're going to last forever, right? So when we can invest in them, how strategic and important that is, and we know the enemy's going to come against it. So if you can recognize the fact that what you're doing is strategic and important, and recognize that when the enemy comes, it's because he knows what you're doing is important, right? So to say, I'm going to be strong and I'm going to be mighty because I have the power of the Lord on me, and step out and do things to keep your family together. Oh God, you're going to be blessed even in the hard times, but we do have to persevere. That's what I have, Sonny.
Oh, that's so good. I mean, there's nothing I could add that would, yeah, be any better or different than that. All I have to say is I'm going through the journey is I'm already seeing the fruits of that. You know, you
Mhm.
talked about siblings that get along together, that have deep conversations with you. I feel like I know my children very well. And so if you're starting out and it's a hard thing right now and you don't feel like you're getting anything done, the proof is in the pudding. You will start
Mhm.
to see it as your children get older. And I know, like Sarita, the things you mentioned, I'm excited for that relationship with grown children one day because I'm already starting to see the pieces of it. And I love the reminder that yeah, it's hard, but it's important. God calls us to raise our children and disciple our children, and that should be our biggest goal. Sometimes we lose that when it gets hard or we're focused on the busyness of day-to-day life, but absolutely, that's so encouraging and so good. And like you said earlier, if you are struggling and you're watching this or listening to us, please reach out. We will pray for you and encourage you however we
Mhm.
can. And join the Sunlight Connections community.
Yeah.
There will definitely be people in there further along that can share their success stories with you or share the advice that's worked in their families. And you're not doing this alone. God is with you. We are with you. And we're so excited that you are on this journey. But we know that it is hard sometimes. And so, Sarita, thank you so much for bringing
Mm.
that encouragement. That was so good and life giving, and hopefully will be helping out a ton of new people that are struggling and going through some things right now. But like we said, please reach out to us if you need anything at all.
Maybe so.